Hello everyone, Loremaster of Sotek here, and today's video we are going to talk about some new lore. When the largest nation in the Warhammer world was confirmed as a playable faction, one of my greatest fears was that it would be slapped by endless rewrites into something absurd and distracting, or in the worst case scenario, feel like an Age of Sigmar faction. Not that there's anything wrong with Age of Sigmar factions. I personally very much love Age of Sigmar lore, to be frank, but I dreaded the idea of something emerging from the unknown that would not fit the Warhammer world we love. There's a very particular feeling to Warhammer fantasy races, in that they're a bizarre fusion of history and fantasy that stays close enough to the ground or reality to feel plausible. There aren't bizarre gods running around battlefields, unleashing continent-destroying spells, or war machines that can obliterate mountains with ease, firing off in every direction. It's intimate, for lack of a better term, and everything a race possesses ties itself to our reality either through the history, science, or mythology of our world. Many of the units and weapons are directly taken from the real world with little grains of fantasy salt added, or are things that fit a theme that could theoretically exist if you twisted physics just a smidge, or of course are just myths brought to life. Kislev and Cathay have thus far met this challenge fantastically, and in my opinion, Cathay has honestly stuck the landing better than the Frosty Servants of Urson did. Honestly, I'm still a little worried about Kislev, but that's a discussion for another day. Right now, I want to focus on just how good of a job Games Workshop and Creative Assembly did with Cathay, because I don't think many people realize how clever and subtle the writers have been. It would have been extremely simple to just hurl a bunch of retcons at us and demand the community get with the program, but that's not what happened. The new Cathay lore thus far has been brilliant because at its core, the vast majority of the lore and stories we have for Cathay still fit into the puzzle that's been set before us. It functions beautifully within the wider world and tells a fantastical tale. There's no better way to show this off than my favorite piece of the new lore revealed so far, which is the Celestial Dragon Emperor. Let me explain. Before Games Workshop lost their mind temporarily to short-sightedness and greed when they blew up the Warhammer Fantasy world, there were small tidbits about Cathay. Much of it came from older sources, such as brief mentions in 2nd edition, which was more of a role-playing game than a strategy game, as much of what we consider to be Warhammer Fantasy battles really started in 3rd edition by Games Workshop's own admission. There's also a surprising focus on Grand Cathay in the Lizardman 5th edition army book, as the Emperor tried to conquer the Southlands with his armies, but that didn't go well, especially since that army that sailed east to invade the Southland's western shore by crossing, over the planet, accidentally discovered Lustria instead, because they didn't know it was there. But virtually all of this lore is useless to us, because anything older than 6th edition is frankly an entirely different universe that is so distinct it makes it nearly impossible to tie into the modern lore, which is why I just don't frankly bother with it. I know not everyone agrees with that, but in my experience, in the vast majority of cases, that's always the right call. So, with that in mind, what do we have from 6th edition onwards? Well, not much. There's a few hints scattered throughout the various core rulebooks, some token mentions and timelines for the Ogre Kingdoms and the Warriors of Chaos, but not much else. Cathay did feature briefly in Tarmacon, the Throne of Chaos by Forge World, but the army and the design we got were rather infamously based on Japanese themes instead of Chinese themes. Whoops. I guess someone didn't do a very good job of their research, so we're just going to kind of ignore that one. In any event, what little we did have that makes sense is the following, and we're going to be focusing very heavily on the Dragon Emperor for the reasons of this video, which is looking at how he's changed. So, once upon a time, there was a mysterious figure known as the Celestial Dragon Emperor, who according to legend was in truth a dragon that could use sorcery to take on the form of a man. His initial appearance is said to have been after the Great Cataclysm, when the Old Ones were destroyed in their war with the Chaos Gods, and the polar gates at either side of the world imploded. Waves of raw magic pulsed across the planet, and the demonic legions of chaos were unleashed in all of their horrifying glory. The demons were without end. Billions of screeching monstrosities born into existence formed from the emotions of all sentient life upon the planet, and hell-bent on destroying or perverting everything in their path. While the lizardmen, dwarfs, and elves fought their desperate wars in the west, the demons found the early ogre and human tribes in the east. By all rights, they should have been obliterated during this time, the ogres and humans, but they weren't thanks to the arrival of an immensely powerful stranger. This Celestial Dragon Emperor, as he would come to be known, united the tribes of men in what would become Cathay beneath his banner, and managed to push back the demonic tides. The war against the demons raged on for nearly 1,200 years before the elves of Ulthuan finally managed to complete the ritual that would bring the vortex into existence, draining the magic of the world and ending the demonic threat, at least for now. Either during the war against the demons of chaos or very quickly afterwards, the Celestial Dragon Emperor manages to create an unfathomably massive structure known as the Great Bastion along the northern border of Grand Cathay, providing a nearly invincible defense to hold back the tides of chaos that would flood out of the north. From there, peace would reign in Cathay for thousands of years until the ogres who inhabited the fertile grasslands on the western border started to grow too great in number. Things had been peaceful for millennia with the ogres, and Cathay had even shared with them the secret of fire and the basics of metalworking. The Celestial Dragon Emperor seemed to think of them as allies, or at the very least tolerated the brutes. This changed once the ogres grew in such number that the wandering herds native to the steppes of the ancient giant lands and grasslands were no longer enough, so the lumbering gluttons turned their eyes upon Cathay and began to raid their villages for food. Some among the ogres even began feasting upon the humans themselves, developing a preferred taste for man flesh. This the Dragon Emperor would not tolerate, so he unleashed upon the ogres a spell of unfathomable devastation. Whether this sorcery was cast by the Emperor himself or his cast of astromancers isn't clear, but regardless, the result was horrific. The largest meteor to ever strike the planet that we know of plummeted from the heavens. The Celestial Orb, an immense chunk of warpstone that seemed to burn with sentient hunger. The resulting impact obliterated 2/3 of the ogre race in an instant, turning the entirety of their homeland into the nightmarish hellscape known today as the Warpstone Desert, and giving birth to a hungry new god known as the Great Maw. The toxic fumes and poisonous clouds thrown into the atmosphere by the comet's trail left all roads to the east impassable, so the ogres fled into the west and would no longer disturb the nation of Grand Cathay. After this incident, the Celestial Dragon Emperor dipped in and out of the timeline. One of the great trials his nation faced appeared when the Slun Mage priest known as Lord Quex realigned the continents to match their placement to that desired by the Great Plan according to the sacred plaques. This resulted in titanic earthquakes across the world, most notably detonating a colossal doomsday engine in Skavenblight that nearly exterminated the entirety of their race and sent the Dwarf Empire into decline. Less known, however, is that this also caused such tremendous quakes in Cathay that the Great Bastion was torn asunder in multiple places. Great rents torn open that allowed tides of marauder tribes to invade with ease. The warriors of chaos were able to pour into Grand Cathay as never before. Yet despite this apocalyptic scenario, the Celestial Dragon Emperor managed to resist the servants of the Dark Gods and defeated the hordes of chaos once again. If that isn't an absurd feat, I don't know what is. It really seems like that should have been a near instant win scenario for chaos, but the Dragon Emperor was able to fight back. Beyond that, there are only scant mentions for the remainder of the timeline, with various notes about trade with the High Elves, the early humans of Nehekara, and of course later with the many nations of men in the West. The Dark Elves are also notorious opponents of Grand Cathay, but they never committed to a large-scale invasion, only raiding isolated fishing villages and occasional port cities and lightning assaults that are quick to depart before the famously powerful Cathayan armies can mount a proper counter-assault. In the final years of the world, virtually nothing would be noted or confirmed about Cathay during the end times. As Games Workshop could not be bothered to detail everything happening to all of the characters and races we did know, it's hardly surprising that the more obscure lands were left out almost entirely. There were suggestions that the Legions of Chaos had encountered great difficulty in destroying Cathay, being repulsed again and again along with their Skaven allies. Supposedly, it was the Beastwa of Grimgor Ironhide, his combined horde of ogres and greenskins, that would eventually succeed in smashing aside both the Chaos Legions and the armies of Grand Cathay in the end. But to say the specifics are vague is an understatement. Anyway, that was a long setup to explain why I am enjoying the lore updates for the Celestial Dragon Emperor so far. Based on the old lore, we know we're dealing with a supposedly immortal figure capable of eyebrow-raising levels of magic and engineering, that has such an incredible amount of power he can cast out the Legions of Chaos even when all of the odds are stacked against him. He's surprisingly diplomatic to a point, with his tolerance of the ogres rather than attempting to subjugate them, but once they turned into a threat, his wrath was quite the event to behold. The Emperor genuinely attempted to wipe out an entire sentient race for messing with his people using the equivalent of a Warhammer nuke far larger than anything our real world has invented so far when it comes to bombs. Destroying a city is one thing, but turning thousands upon thousands of miles of open country into a nightmarish hellscape is impressive if not terrifying. I suspect the Celestial Dragon Emperor did not realize the comet was made of warpstone, or at the very least grossly underestimated the effects, seeing as he didn't attempt to pull that stunt again. Still, that gives us the baseline. An empire of humans ruled over by what can only be described as a godlike immortal who is capable of sorcery only the Slann and the mightiest of mortal wizards can match, along with feats of engineering that rivals the greatest feats of the dwarfs. So, what is the new lore by Games Workshop and Creative Assembly added to the Celestial Dragon Emperor, and how does it fit? Well, first things first. We receive official confirmation that he is indeed a dragon, who can use some damn impressive magic to take the form of a man. We're also told that he predates the arrival of the Old Ones by a notable margin, which makes sense, but we'll discuss that particular nugget in a moment. Alongside the Emperor is his wife and equal, the Moon Empress, who is also a dragon, and predates the arrival of the Old Ones. From there, we get information about how the Celestial Dragon Emperor in ancient times rallied the men of Cathay to fight back against the tides of chaos, and used his magic to raise the Great Bastion. It seems that the Dragon Emperor is quite the sorcerer, in fact, as he is also responsible for the creation of the Terracotta Sentinels, which are ancient constructs that seem to have been crafted by him during the same period as the Great Bastion itself, as we know the fortress wall has a significant number of the constructs built into it. Then, of course, we get information about him dictating his philosophy of yin and yang along with harmony to his subjects, before going on to have children and constructing the Celestial City, which to this day is above Weijin. Or maybe it's always been there above Weijin and it was just built below it. I don't know, we'll talk more about that later. He's noted to be on the same power scale as many of the Warhammer world's gods, and is up to something in his heavenly abode. Plus a brief mention that he and his wife vanished for 400 years, which nearly led to the destruction of Cathay itself, as the hordes of chaos staged a massive series of invasions, which allowed the Monkey King to rise in the south, and eventually claim the throne of Grand Cathay for himself until the Celestial Dragon Emperor and his wife returned to unite with their children and kick out the usurper. That's a lot of information. More than it even appears to be on the surface. Just the confirmation that the Celestial Dragon Emperor is one of the primordial dragons is a bombshell that fits everything we knew perfectly. For those unaware, the Warhammer world has a history that goes back long before the arrival of the Old Ones. Back in those ancient times, most of the planet was ruled by dragons, colossal titans who were of such immense size that the large drakes of the modern age, such as Galrach and Emmeric's dragon Manathnir, are mere children in comparison. The only two of the original titans we know of from this age are Krakenrock the Black and Kalgalanos the Black, the former being the father of the dragon ogre race, while the latter is the father of dragons, or at least Western dragons. Both were easily the size of mountains, and they were bitter rivals that fought over a planet covered almost entirely in ice, with the exception of the equator, where enough heat existed for there to be jungles that were home to the likes of Dreadsaurians, Carnosaurs, and Stegodons. The dragons were the kings of this ice age, and the mightiest children of Kalgalanos were dragons capable of rivaling his size and power, known in today's world as Emperor Dragons. The Celestial Dragon Emperor may well be one of these children, but based on his accomplishments and how unique the Cathayan dragons are from the Western dragons, I'm more inclined to believe that the Celestial Dragon Emperor and the Moon Empress are the primordial progenitors of their own species of dragons. So they're more like cousins or siblings to Kalgalanos the Black, as opposed to children. This is a huge deal, as one of the cardinal laws of Warhammer Fantasy is that in most cases, the older something is, the more powerful it is. Being one of the ancient dragons from before the Old Ones arrived means that the Celestial Dragon Emperor is undoubtedly one of the most powerful creatures to still walk the earth, more akin to a god than the likes of Manathnir. It is said that the ancient dragons were so powerful and wise that they had the capacity to speak with the Old Ones themselves, a feat so incredibly rare that even among the unrivaled prowess of the Slann, only the first generation mage priests, such as Lord Croak, were able to commune with their creators, as otherwise the mental toll was just too much. It stands to reason that the Celestial Dragon Emperor and his wife were among those able to treat with the alien gods, for the Old Ones were noted to be fond of the dragons, and considered them kindred spirits in a sense. Don't be mistaken though, even for the likes of the Dragon Emperor, the Old Ones were a power unlike anything the world had ever seen. To them, reality was molding clay, things that they played with, and they were capable of feats that are just absurd, beyond absurd. Let's get back on track for timeline stuff, however. The arrival of the Old Ones was at least 6,000 years before the formation of the Empire, perhaps even earlier before that. They create the first generation of the Slann and start constructing the polar gates at both ends of the planet while starting to change the Earth to suit their desires. One of the largest alterations made by the Old Ones and the Slann was to drag the planet closer to the Sun and alter its orbit, so that it would significantly warm up the place. This move wasn't popular with the dragons, as they vastly preferred the Ice Age they had always known, so most of the ancient drakes retreated deep beneath the earth and seas to sleep until another age more to their liking bloomed. But not all of them. Some of these primordial beings chose to stay awake, and among their number were the Celestial Dragon Emperor and his wife. From here, they seem to have merely observed the efforts of the Old Ones, content to reside within their celestial city, if it existed yet, and taking little action. Eventually, however, after hundreds if not thousands of years, the polar gates imploded due to the machinations of chaos, and the great catastrophe was unleashed. So, we get that line from Miao Ying in the trailer about how those who dared to tempt or challenge fate brought on ruination instead. This is kind of what they're referring to, is that the Old Ones were literally tinkering with the fabric of reality and trying to change fate, change destiny, and it didn't really go according to plan. From here, the Celestial Dragon Emperor wasted little time, taking on the form of a man to rally the young race of humans and teaching them magic, engineering, and the arts of warfare so that they could fight back against the demonic hordes. As a side note, the creation of the Great Bastion and Terracotta Sentinels implies to me that the Celestial Dragon Emperor and his wife are capable of casting geomancy, one of the strongest forms of magic and by far the oldest. The winds of magic as we know them today only exist because of the realm of chaos constantly vomiting out the stuff from the north. But before the arrival of the Old Ones, this did not exist. Instead, the magic of the world was generated by the planet itself, and existed in ley lines that crisscrossed the planet. According to the ancient records of the Lizardmen, this ancient magic was energy given off by the tectonic plates shifting around, in addition to the immense heat given off by the planet's core. Those gifted with the knowledge could use this power to conjure magic, which is essentially the process of using energy to shape reality under certain conditions and rules. But it is an incredibly rare talent known only to the Slann and a very few elves, along with the likes of the Celestial Dragon Emperor, to utilize this natural source of magic instead of using the more chaotic winds of magic. I personally am extremely curious to learn if the lores of Yin and Yang might utilize a different source of magic than simply pulling from the winds, but we'll have to wait and see. In any event, the other additions to the lore for the Celestial Dragon Emperor revolve primarily around his 400-year disappearance and some mystery project he's working on within the Celestial City. We don't know exactly when the Emperor and his wife vanished, but if I had to guess, they departed sometime around 1500 years before the formation of the Empire, when Lord Quex's realignment spell tore open the Great Bastion and allowed the hordes of chaos to invade Grand Cathay like never before. This assault was said to have torn all the way down into the heart of Cathay itself, which likely means that the Emperor wasn't around to assist his children, and the ensuing chaos also permitted the Monkey King to launch his assault from the south. Now, that's only a suspicion. It could also be that Games Workshop and Creative Assembly picked some other 400-year time slot in the very empty timeline of Cathay. In fact, I would personally love it if maybe they vanished and that whole incident happened only about 500 years ago, like when they came back, because that would mean that the chaos side of the invasion was likely led by one of the 9 Everchosens we know nothing about. Because for those unfamiliar, we know there are 13 Everchosens, including Archaon, but we only know 4 of them. The first being Morkar the Uniter, second being, I think his name was Vandal, and then we know Azavar Kul, who was the 12th, and Archaon, who was the 13th. If their disappearance and that huge invasion and stuff happened during the Lord Quex incident, that means it could not have been related to an Everchosen, since this was long before Morkar the Uniter showed up, who was the first ever Everchosen, as he fought Sigmar a good 30-ish years after the formation of the Empire. So, it could be either way. This is all dragged on a lot longer than I originally intended, but I think I've spoken enough to get my point across. The new lore for Cathay is extremely exciting stuff, but most importantly to me, the additions have thus far fit in very nicely with the bizarre puzzle that is the Warhammer Fantasy lore. I personally cannot wait to learn more about the Dragon Emperor, and I hope as part of the campaign we get a lot of insights into what has been going on over the last 7,000 years in the Far East. I'm also quite curious on what is the deal with the Moon Empress. Who is she exactly? Part of me wonders if she's just another powerful dragon, or is in fact some sort of draconic entity that is actually related to Manslib, which is the empire name for the true moon, in some way, as there's not really a spirit of the true moon that I know of in Warhammer Fantasy. There are a lot of things associated with it, a good number of gods that are associated with it, but that's not the same. It doesn't have a true entity that represents it on the planet, and the Moon Empress may actually be that character, which would be thematic and really fun to learn about, because that moon's been there forever. So it stands to reason that if it does have a spirit, if it does have some sort of creature that is bound to it and is a physical representation of it, that it would be one of these ancient dragons or a creature equivalent in age to them. So maybe that is what the Moon Empress is. That would actually be a really fun and interesting lore tidbit. In any event, I'm additionally eager to learn what the old Dragon Emperor is up to in the Celestial City since he returned from his vacation. I'll bet it has something to do with the narrative of Total War Warhammer 3. Perhaps he is devising his own way to kill the Chaos Gods, like the old ones tried to do so long ago. It would be kind of ironic, considering how bitter his children seem towards the old ones, for him to maybe not necessarily learn from their mistakes and be trying to do functionally the same thing. Also, just how old are his kids? Anyway, lots more to come and talk about, but I think we're at a good stopping point here. If you have any thoughts or questions about my theories presented here today, let me know down in the comment section below. Do you have any theories about the Celestial Dragon Emperor? I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and something I really wanted to say is I didn't make this video in response to it, but I know there are a lot of people out there, maybe not a lot, but a loud minority who seem genuinely worried that Cathay or the Celestial Dragon Emperor himself is some kind of Mary Sue or ridiculous power-up that, you know, ruins the Warhammer Fantasy world or something. And I hope this video can make it clear that honestly, when it comes to just a power level situation, the Celestial Dragon Emperor hasn't changed. He's basically the exact same. I mean, they've put it in writing now that he is equal in power to many gods, but that's not as big of a power level as a lot of people are probably worried it is. Is the Celestial Dragon Emperor able to go toe-to-toe with the Chaos Gods? Probably not. The Chaos Gods are rather obscene. But could he go toe-to-toe with the pantheons of some of the other nations, like the Ancestor Gods, or the Elven Gods, or, you know, the Empire Gods, or the Nehakaran Gods? Absolutely. I fully believe he could do that. But, like, the idea that he's maybe, like, oh, he's so absurd now. Not really. He's the same as he's always been. We've always been dealing with a character who somehow was able to hold off the legions of demons during that big war, the first war, the great cataclysm, where the demons of chaos invaded the planet. To put into perspective how absurd that war was, you need to realize that the Lizardmen had a global empire that got shoved all the way down into Lustria and the Southlands because they couldn't hold it back. There were billions upon billions of demons, and we have records of some demons being so titanic in size that they can't manifest into the world anymore because the amount of magic it would take to sustain their bodies just doesn't exist because of the vortex. We're talking about the Chaos Gods throwing literally everything they had at the world over and over and over again, and the races of the world were able to fight back, but it was a losing battle until the vortex was introduced. And yet, while all of that's going on, the Celestial Dragon Emperor is the only significant power we know of in the East who was dealing with this. So he was fighting just as much nonsense as the Elves of Ulthuan were, the dwarves of the Karaz Ankor were and the lizardmen were, and yet he was able to survive and to allow Cathay to form. He was at least on par with full-powered Anarian, and is probably above full-powered Anarian because he didn't have a bunch of other things to help him out. So just based on him surviving that incident, like I'm sure the ogres were probably helping. I wouldn't be surprised if maybe that's why he tolerated the ogres, because he managed to rally the ogres to his cause and they were fighting side by side with the early Cathayan humans. But at the end of the day, he's trying to teach all these ogres and humans how to make fire and make buildings and how to fight and work metal. He's trying to teach them all this stuff really, really quickly, while also dealing with the most insane invasion to ever be unleashed against the Warhammer Fantasy planet until the end times. And he did it. I don't think he would have won that war by himself, but he was able to at least hold the demons off for 1200 years or whatever it was, until the elves were able to get the vortex up. So to anyone that's somehow thinking that he's like this ridiculous overpowered character, well, he's always been a ridiculous overpowered character. That's not a change. So don't let anyone try and convince you that Cathay are somehow like getting an unfair power boost or something. We're talking about the largest nation on the Warhammer Fantasy planet, bar none, at the very least the largest nation of men that is also the oldest nation of men. It predates Nehekara. It predates even the city of Khazar. So the idea that it's like, oh, Mary Sue, or that it's somehow breaking the continuity or the lore of the universe is absolutely ridiculous. Nothing that has been introduced is that severe of a change. We're getting a lot of details and a lot of things that help us put pieces into place that we didn't have before, or provide a lot more details into gaps. But this isn't why I made the video. The reason I made the video is just talk about how fascinating I'm finding this stuff and show you how a lot of these gaps are being filled in. But I just wanted to address that. Anyway, rant over. Thank you all so much for watching. Like I said, let me know what y'all think of the Celestial Dragon Emperor down below. Do you have any theories about him? Is there any questions you have about something I said or something that I didn't say that popped into your mind? I'd love to chat about it. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye.